Hello again, Celeste. Today I'm going to talk about emotions that caregivers will feel when their loved one first gets a diagnosis and then well into treatment. So if you saw any of my previous videos, you know that my husband Paul has cancer and he's undergoing chemo right now. He was diagnosed this past December 2019, first with MDS, which is myelodysplastic syndrome, sort of a bone marrow disorder, and then a month later with lymphoma. And so he's getting his treatment now. He just finished round 4 of chemotherapy for both of them, and we're waiting for him to go in for a stem cell transplant, which is coming up very soon. But I wanted to talk about some of the emotions that I felt and how I coped and how I didn't cope. I don't know if I could have done anything differently. Everybody reacts differently to things, but I'm just going to share what I went through because I don't want people to feel alone, and I don't want to feel alone in these emotions. So obviously the first thing I felt was shock and fear, because I didn't know much about the disease or the treatment, and all I could think of was, oh my God, I'm going to lose my husband. And so that was the first reaction. And I also found myself sort of like a deer in the headlights. I felt like I couldn't move. Everything was centered around the diagnosis and who we're going to see next and what the next treatment is. And so I wasn't doing much else in my life that I normally did. And I couldn't initially. There was just no room in my brain for anything else, no room in my emotions, and I didn't feel inspired. And I was worried if I played my music that I would just start crying. So everything just kind of came to a standstill. I also had a lot of self-doubt as the treatment plan manifested itself. I was worried, am I doing right by Paul? Am I doing everything I should? Could I be a better person? At times I would get impatient and then I'd feel really bad about that. Paul changed because of the way he was feeling. He went from a very strong, active man to someone who lacked energy and was so tired. And it's because his hemoglobin was basically cut in half. Also, he initially, before chemotherapy started, he was experiencing pain. Thankfully now that has mostly resolved. But all along throughout this, I have felt a roller coaster of emotions. There are some days when I feel, okay, pretty good. We're doing what we need to do. Let's check off the next thing we need to do, and very methodical. Other days, though, I'm just overwhelmed, and I found I would be outside. It would be a beautiful day. I'd be walking the dog, and I would just feel very lonely and alone, and pictures of my life without Paul being there would creep in, and I would just start crying right there in the middle of the street. And most of the time, I felt best if we were just focusing on what the next step would be. And that's kind of how Paul deals with it. He has never been one to sink into the depths of a despair or anything like that. He's always been very practical and matter of fact. So that's how he is going about this illness. He's just thinking about, what do I need to do next to get myself healthy? And I've tried to adopt that as much as I'm able, but I am a little more emotional, so I get caught up in all of that. And then besides being afraid of losing Paul and afraid of being alone, I've also been grieving the loss of our lives prior to, I guess, November 25th, 2019. We had a very active life. We were working, both of us. We were exercising, traveling. We were helping to take care of my grandson. And all that's changed now. Everything is different. For me personally, I was taking ballet classes, I was taking harp lessons, I was singing with the church choir, and that kind of ended. It didn't have to end during the early diagnosis, but again, I was just stymied, a deer in the headlights. So I kind of dropped off on everything. And then this coronavirus came, and then even if I wanted to go to a ballet class outside of the home, I couldn't. I've been trying to do some ballet classes in the kitchen. It's just not the same. I wasn't playing harp again because, I don't know, I think I was just worried about music and the emotions it evokes in me, and I didn't want to be sitting there at my harp in a puddle crying. But I did recently start playing again, and thankfully I didn't end up in a puddle. I just played the music, and it was a really good distraction because I haven't played in so long. So it's pretty hard, and these pieces that I knew really well seem semi-unfamiliar. So the challenge of revisiting that music and concentrating on the notes and all that, it really took my mind off stuff. So that was a good thing, and I would recommend some sort of thing like that. Coloring, mandala coloring books is something I also enjoy. I haven't done that lately, but I've been thinking about it. And doing the ballet at home, even though it's not the same, and my kitchen floor is slippery and tiny, and but at least I'm doing it. And then I've also been trying to exercise. That's something else. Okay, so this is a really bad non-coping mechanism. I found I'm an emotional eater, and I have packed on the pounds, not only from the coronavirus and being quarantined, but prior to that, I was eating out of control. It was kind of like, it was just a bad dysfunctional coping mechanism. So I am trying to exercise now and to try and get back to where I was. It's kind of odd because Paul lost 25 pounds and I've gained not quite that much, but quite a bit. And I don't like how I feel. It's uncomfortable. And so that's something I can focus on now that Paul's treatment is underway. And I've also felt guilt sometimes. Sometimes I get impatient with Paul because he can't move as fast as he used to. Things are harder for him. And I'm thinking back to the Paul from 5 months ago. And this is a totally different Paul, and he can't help it. He's not doing it on purpose. And I shouldn't get impatient, but I do. I mean, it's not an everyday thing. It's just little tidbits here and there. But every time I do feel impatience with him, then I feel very guilty. And I think I should cut myself a little more slack because this is such a total turnaround in such a short period of time. So currently, we've been very frustrated because with the coronavirus, the procedure that Paul needs to have done, the urinary stent that he needs to have replaced, the hospitals are not allowing it. They consider it elective. It has to be replaced every 3 to 6 months or every 4 to 6 months, depending on who you talk to. So in June, it would be considered absolutely necessary, but right now it isn't, except he cannot get his transplant until this stent is switched out or removed, because once he gets a transplant, he will not have an immune system and he cannot undergo invasive surgery. What will happen is that Paul's immune system, after he gets the stem cells, The stem cells will have to graft into his body, and gradually they will build up and rebuild an immune system. But that takes a long time, and the first 100 days are critical, and particularly the first month. He'll have to stay in the hospital on an isolation ward, because at that time there will be really nothing to protect him. But as time goes on, more and more, his immune system will build up and eventually get back to a normal level. So this is holding things up, and it's been very frustrating, and we feel like the urologist that Paul's been working with has not been very attentive. The guy who did the stent in the first place was great, but then he didn't want to do the follow-up and referred us to some guy Paul saw years ago, and we aren't impressed. I won't get into it any more than that. But yesterday we did talk to a new urologist, and the advantage with him is that his practice has surgical suites apart from the hospital. So the rules are different for them, and they can, if they deem a surgery necessary, semi-emergency, they can do it. And so thank God we have a potential date of next Tuesday for this stent to be replaced. And we communicated with the transplant doctor, and he feels like there's no need to switch Paul's transplant date. He will have a little bit over a week to recover, and so it looks like everything's good to go. And so this is very happy for us, because it's like, there it is in the distance, the cure, the potential cure. The procedure itself, the transplant, carries a great amount of risk. Paul will not have an immune system because they will give him massive chemo, let him rest a day, and then give him the stem cells. So there's a lot of risk involved, but I'm very optimistic about that. I feel really good about it. I don't have any weird gut feeling of dread or anything involving the transplant. So I think everything is good to go, and so I feel really good about that. So before I wrap up this video, I did want to mention one thing, that if you're having trouble coping, and I know I didn't give any answers here, I'm just sharing my experience. I'm no therapist by any means, but one thing that is helping me, even though it's a little different, I have been participating in a weekly, it's sort of a caregiver support group or significant other support group. It's for anyone who has a loved one who's undergoing cancer treatment, spouse, friend, child, significant other, whatever, you know, anyone can go. And I mean, obviously you sign up, fill out forms, you know, you don't just show up. But of course, now we're needing to do the significant other support group through WebEx, which is sort of like Zoom, because we can't get together as a group. So we're doing it that way, which adds to the weirdness. It's not as communicative as it normally would be if you were sitting around in a circle, but it serves its purpose. I found it pretty helpful. In some ways it's a little depressing because there's all varying levels of cancer. Some of the people in the group have a new diagnosis like Paul does. He doesn't go, it's just, you know, it's just the significant other. Some people are mid-treatment, some people are in good recovery, their spouses or significant others are in good recovery. Unfortunately, some, though, their significant others are at the end stage, and that's kind of hard. I feel bad, just so bad for them, because I hear their stories and it's just so sad, and I don't want that to be my future. I want to have the future I envision Paul in recovery, us celebrating next year when he's 1 year past transplant, which is considered a fairly safe landmark. That's what I want to envision. I want to see us 15 years, 20 years from now, healthy, happy grandparents, watching our children get married and have kids, watching our grandson and any future grandkids grow up, graduate, get married, have kids. I'd like to be around to see as much of that as I can, and I want Paul there with me. So sorry about getting emotional. I cry easily. And this is how it's been these past 5 months. But I want to be positive. I want to look to the future and deal with whatever comes. And hopefully we'll get there. So I'll end the video here. Thanks for listening. Bye.